This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Ronald Kimmons for the first
Hello,
time. How you
hello.
doing tonight?
Fabulous,
So
fabulous.
it's
How are
always
you?
great to interview new people. I'm doing really well. I'm in New Hampshire, and we're happy to be podcasting. We're actually at episode, which we're actually going to pop up now, um 880 of the podcast, and we've been out here since 2016, so we're happy about that. And want to let everybody know for the audio audience, we have your link up there. So it's www.ronaldkimmons.com forward
Ronald
slash
M. Kimmons.
free dash novel. Kimmons.
Ronald M. Kimmons. There's an M
About
in there.
M.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, to do that again for the audio audience, it's www.ronaldmkimmons.com forward slash free dash novel. And just want to let people know that's up there for the people on the audio audience. They don't get to see the links, so we started to realize that.
Right.
So thank you for being on the show. We also want to mention that we are a podcast on Newsly. You can see the icon if you're watching the listen on Newsly. And if you use coupon code GHOST, you can get 1 month free premium subscription. So you can stop scrolling and start listening. We are a free podcast on Newsly platform, and that's an audio only platform. You'll be able to listen to that later tonight. So thank you again for being on the show. And
Yeah.
just as a question, we always like to talk to people. How long have you been an author? When did you start knowing that you wanted to be an author?
So those are two very different questions. Like I've wanted to be a novelist since I was a little kid. I used to write stories in spiral notebooks. I would go and my mom would be washing dishes in the kitchen, and I'd go and I just kind of brainstorm out loud and talk to her about my stories, my story ideas. A lot of those ideas, most of those ideas never actually made it to paper, but I did put a lot of them down on paper. And then like in fourth grade and fifth grade, my school had competitions where we would actually go and write books, and I won best book. Every kid in the school wrote a book, and I won best book both years, fourth and fifth grade, and I was one of the great proud moments of my life. And but as I became an adult and went to college and everything, I did a double major in English and Chinese, but I didn't seriously pursue being a novelist at that time because I just didn't think that it was a realistic thing. Because I knew and I know that most novelists don't make very much money, right? Um, so I did
Like
other
most
things.
musicians.
Yeah. So I did other things, but I still wrote a lot. I still wrote various things. In my professional life, I did a lot of writing. I was a translator. I was a content writer, and I wrote a lot of short stories on the side just for fun. And these last few years, starting in 2016, my wife and I quit my desk job at a translation company and said, let's start. And I said, let's start a digital marketing business. And she said, okay, we'll do it together. And so we did it together, and we've slowly built that. And it's gotten to the point where um, what I was doing in the business was mostly the sales and the copywriting, right?
Hmm.
And she was doing like everything else. And now it's gotten to the point where we just kind of decided, that she's going to take over. She's going to take over the business, and I'm going on to my next thing, which is being a novelist. And she's been very supportive of that. And because she's a big fantasy fan, she loves to read fantasy, and so she loves the idea of me writing fantasy. So she's been very supportive of that. And
Hmm.
so and as we've noted, my novel that I recently released, is Wild River, and that just came out a month ago. So technically, I've only been a novelist with a book that people can buy for about a month.
For my month. So you're just well, I think it's interesting as a creative myself. I've been a musician since I was like 12 years old, and then I actually took it serious back in 2016. I started publishing, and then I started podcasting, and then I found a synergy between both. And it's not my day job. I'm in IT, but I'm a synthesist. I'm a synthesizer guy. But yeah, I think the creative kind of buzz with for people is like you feel like you love something and you want to do what you love, and it becomes a hobby or it becomes a serious I always look at it as a serious endeavor. It's like you have a hobby, but becomes something that's actually more than that. It's just like a side gig, or it's like your passion. I actually call it a passion,
Yeah.
because then because like people want to be able to live out their dreams. And when you're younger, people say, well, you can't realistically be a musician, or you can't realistically be a novelist because there's so many people out there. But I think the way the world has changed with like social media and all these platforms and self-publishing, just like for musicians, we can self-publish our music. We can get it out there in a way where the gatekeepers aren't as involved. So what did you feel about like the gatekeepers that maybe were when you were younger, and now you discovered when you wanted to do this novel? Did you went the self-publishing route, or you with a
Right.
publisher?
Yeah. Yeah. Self-publishing, because, and I have no plans of pursuing a relationship with a traditional publisher, at least not until I've already established myself to the point where I would negotiate with them from a position of strength.
Mhm.
I looking at all the work that it takes novelists to get published by traditional publishers, and then looking at the fact that even once they do get published, a lot of the time those publishers don't even really invest their resources
And they'll
into
market.
pushing that novel. What are they there for? What do they deliver? And so instead of spending all my energy, writing 400 um, uh, queries, to different publishers, I'm
You
just
work at
going
the work.
to
You do
take
the
that
work.
in. Yeah, I'm just going to take that and pour that into building my own following, which they can't take away from me. That goes to me and not to the publisher, right? Um, and see, as I said, we have a digital marketing business, so we know a lot about digital marketing now. The kind of marketing that we've been doing in the past has been for very different things. For we have our clients are like coaches and course creators, people with like
That's
online
content.
courses, that kind of thing. And it's a different kind of marketing. It's a different need. And we've primarily done things through paid traffic, running ads on Facebook and other places. Um, and and we would only do that with clients that have already built up an organic following, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So coming and doing it for myself, I'm actually having to learn a lot of new things, even though we already know a lot about marketing. We haven't in the past we haven't done so much organic for ourselves, so I'm having to
Hmm.
build that foundation for myself and get that solid before we can go and start doing the things that we're more familiar with, which is the running ads and things like that. So I'm having to learn a lot myself, even though I know a lot about digital marketing. I'm having to do things that I've never had to do before. Um,
Yeah. Do you
but
find that that's a lot? Do you find it very different to take somebody who's got a service, like somebody who's like a life coach, right? And they're selling services. They've got a following. They've got an established clientele, right? And like if you're a creative person, it's always hard to kind of market that because art is hard to market versus like a service or a product
yeah, well,
because like
I mean,
people
like
have to like it.
in terms of
you know?
units sold, it's pretty easy to get to sell more units, but the thing is the unit price is a lot lower. Like for our clients, it's pretty normal for us to help them sell courses that go for $500, $1,000, 2,000, and then coaching programs that go for 10,000, even $20,000. So you get a few sales there and you're doing good. But selling a $9 ebook, you have to get a lot of sales, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
it's
It's
very
like
different
music.
thing. Yeah, and the thing is, we for a lot of our clients, we would do things where we would, and we still do. We'll run campaigns where might sell something for $9 or for $20. And it's a low ticket thing, but then once we make that connection, then we walk them up uh, this, a staircase, of higher and higher offers. Then we start talking to
Hmm.
them about, hey, here's this $500 course. Hey, here's this $10,000 coaching program.
Hmm. Yeah, you can
Once you
upsell,
establish that
upsell.
connection, but
Yeah,
right now, as a novelist, I just have my novel,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's the problem with
Um,
music. Like you can have a single that you get
yeah,
streamed, you get 0.006 of a penny, You could sell it for 99 cents as a download, which nobody buys. You could try to sell it as a cassette, which you could send, $10. You could sell it as vinyl, maybe $30. You could sell a T-shirt or a sweatshirt like this and make like $50. So a lot of musicians, like, we actually make more money selling this than we do selling our music. So our upsell is our merch. Is the fact that we have T-shirts and posters and hoodies and things like that. And we found ways to do that. And that's the nature of our business today, that the music actually gets less money than the shirt, unless you
Yeah,
sell it to a sync licensing.
yeah,
Unless
and
you get it licensed to turn it into a TV show or, yeah, which you might be looking at. But
the merchandising is definitely something I've looked at, especially since as a fantasy writer, specifically as fantasy, like that is one kind of area where readers will have more of a tendency to want to buy merchandise, to buy like little figurines and even
mhm.
clothing and maybe necklaces and stuff like that. So that's definitely something I've thought about and that I want to do at some point. But right now I'm just kind of focused on getting a following, getting some solid book sales, and going from there. So yeah, I'm still kind of in the early stages, but I am going to build toward that in the future, and might even work towards some high ticket offers. But I'm not sure right now what those would be at this point.
Have you looked at the synergy with like the Comic Cons and the people who are into like the cosplay type of people that are into fantasy concepts, where people would, oh yeah, they'd like the figurines, they like
Yeah,
trading cards, they like, you know tangible things, right? So if you created the figurines of the characters from the novel, if you created like trading cards with the characters from the novel, then you go to a convention and you have a table, then you actually then can get into that market with those people. And I've actually talked to authors that started to get into like showing up at the Comic Cons and showing up at like the cost type of places, and we're surprised at the level of interaction that they started getting from those type of fans.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely something that I can see happening in the future, and an example of that is Brandon Sanderson. He's a big fantasy novelist, and he's become very popular. I actually went to his Dragonsteel convention here just a couple months ago, and and yeah, he's done like he sells a lot of merchandise. Like I know recently he crowdfunded a campaign that for figurines, custom made, specifically
Hmm.
for his characters, from
Hmm.
his novel. Like, and that, yeah, that's definitely something that can be done, and that's definitely like that same crowd would definitely be interested in that. Yeah, that's something that I am interested in doing in the future, and I've been looking into that.
Yeah, because that's the kind of the way that a lot of musicians, we're getting into that. We're starting to look at, like into NFTs. We're looking at, if you're a musician like me, I create a lot of soundtrack work working with video game guys. But like, so you work with big video games, then you get involved with those people and they show up at the video game convention. And then you start to like, oh, people want, a signed copy of the soundtrack. And then you start, oh, I'll put that on vinyl, I'll put it on tape, I'll put it on reels. And then suddenly you start doing the upsell, where you probably didn't think, like, if you're just out there streaming, you don't make a lot of money. You got to start thinking out the box in order to figure out how to actually, generate money in the creative economy. But it seems like, yeah, the merch is kind of cross multiple like disciplines, between being an author or being a writer or being a musician or being a painter. You find a way to get your stuff into hands of the collector market. um, Seems to be a cool thing to do.
And yeah, and like I said, yeah, the fantasy, specifically the fantasy crowd, I know is very receptive to that. And
Hmm.
that, so I'm going to be looking at that in the future. And like in my fantasy world, different kinds of monsters that exist, different specific characters with specific weapons, that you can show them holding the weapons and
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something can be done. And I actually want to do things like make like board games based in my
Hmm.
fantasy world.
Yeah, like Dungeons and Dragons, like you start to think about like a game developer, and there's still a lot of kids they like the card turn based type of playing, and fantasy work kind of falls into that. Like, so if you work with somebody who can design things like that, and it's like working on a movie. It's like working on a project. You're working on a video game. If you coordinate with another person that's good at doing, that's a really good upsell. It's a
Yeah.
cool way to kind of tie people into it. I would think like the Tolkien audience and the Dungeons and Dragons audience is into that type of thinking, or that type of thing. I would think.
Yeah.
So have you thought about other things like audiobooks? I've talked to a bunch of authors that have really taken it almost like control, like being directing a movie version of their book, in that you have to kind of put that degree in each actors. And some people say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do it myself. Well, what are your thoughts about, like, you go into audiobooks? Do you feel like you need voice actors, or you feel like you could do it kind of do it yourself?
So actually, with my free novella, which I, of course, the novella, which is the prequel to the novel, the novella is called Den of the Wolfman, and I actually recorded that as a free ebook. It's also available on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube channel, you can see that. And anyone who gets the free novella from my website will later get an email, directing them to that. So yeah, I've done that with my novella, just with my own voice, and it's okay. Um, I do think I would like to get voice actors for the novel, later on. I think I'm going to have
Hmm.
to wait for now, but yeah, I'm definitely friendly to that idea, especially considering the fact that my fiction tends to be very dialogue heavy. So a lot of the time
Hmm.
it actually kind of reads a little bit more like a screenplay. So I think it actually lends itself very well to audiobooks
A
with,
screenplay, like a
you
screenplay,
know,
maybe teleplay.
yeah, like I think just the way it is, it lends itself to a lot better to adaptation, to either an audiobook or actually just a full film adaptation. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but
Yeah,
but
because
the
yeah,
the
'cause
way I
I was
write it,
was looking
it's
at it.
very
Yeah,
friendly to
it
that.
did have a lot. It had a lot of dialogue, and I did kind of envision it, because I when I work in music, we kind of think of paintings. Like, we try to create things that have a kind of cinematic appeal as musicians, right? And so a lot of times when I read books, or I read, short stories and stuff, the idea, as an artist in the first place, I always tend to picture things and kind of, so, well, how would this be? It lends itself to like the teleplay, the like a theatrical, Netflix series, type of thing. It just seems like that's the kind of what you get out of it when you start to read it. And was that your intention, or is that just the way?
No, I didn't like write my novel with the intent of like, oh, I want to write this so that it can, become a movie. That wasn't really my thought process. The way I write, I like to really drop people into the action and make it move.
Mm,
Um, I think it's something that
mhm.
differentiates me from a lot of fantasy writers, because fantasy writers are very good at world building. Because you have to do that. You have to go and build this
Yeah.
whole fantasy world with its own background, its own history, and everything. And and fantasy writers tend to be very good at doing that, and they tend to be very proud of that. And so when they start writing their story, they want to tell the reader all about the world that they created, right? But the thing is, that ends up being a lot of long, drawn out exposition and not story, right?
Yeah, you get like a Lord
Whereas,
of the Rings. You get this, like, really
and,
heavy Lord of the Rings, deep world.
and like I totally respect that world building aspect, and I admit that a lot of writers are better at that than I am. But my when I actually go to write, I feel that my writing is a lot more fast paced, and it's a lot less boring than a lot of fantasy writers, because it just gets up and goes, and it puts people right in the action. Like you go in there and start reading, and things are happening, and it's going,
Yeah,
right?
it's a quicker
And
read.
I don't,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't go on, like I'll reference things that have happened in the history of that world, or political stuff, but I won't go
Hmm.
on for pages and pages giving exposition about it. I'll just kind of reference it and keep going. And people will kind of figure it out as we go along. That so like that. I think that's one thing that really just sets me apart as a fantasy writer from other fantasy writers, is that. And I realize I've actually had people tell me that they really like writing and reading all that exposition, and that's fine. It's just a matter of of style. That's not really my style.
Hmm.
That's not how I
Yeah, yeah.
really do things. Like I generally when I start a novel, it begins a lot more like a realistic fiction novel, where it just goes in, and you have dialogue, you have people talking, you have people doing stuff,
Yeah, it's like
and then
character. It
dropping
seems
the
like
action.
your character.
Yeah, it's very character driven.
Seems like you're more character focused than the world than the world focus. It's kind of
Yeah,
reminds me of like a teleport. If you think about like TV, you don't have time to build that, right? Like, cause like if you have episodes that are a half hour long, it kind of lends itself to dialogue, character building. You're trying to get to the heart of the chemistry between the protagonist and the antagonist to understand it. And then there's like when you're reading a book, if it doesn't build that world, you leave more to the imagination of the reader.
yeah,
Right? They can kind of pick up, they'll interpret it however they want. It's like when you're writing a song, people can interpret that world because if you have a kind of broad stroke, you're not getting too detailed, you leave it kind of vague, and then people can like, interpret it however they want to. So is that your intention? Like you don't necessarily have to paint every layer of that world. You can, kind of leave it open so people can have their own interpretation.
yeah. I mean, I'll reference things that are going on in the world, and show them that, to show them that there is this bigger world, right? And give them just enough to create that feeling of depth, you know.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
just don't really focus on it a whole lot. Um,
And not
and the
making it
funny thing
overwrought. I think some people
yeah,
they do it kind of an overwrought detail where it becomes like 1,000, 2,000 pages. You're like, okay. And there was a time, back in the 70s when I was I'm a child of the 70s. Yeah, yeah, you could sit there and you had the time to do that. But in a world where there's thousands of channels, media, and people have their TikTok open, I don't know if people have the discipline to actually sit there and read through that detailed a book. Maybe there are fans that are into that and they do, but like I get your audience, you're reading your audience, and so the feedback from your fans is that they like your style of doing it more in a direct way.
yeah, and I have to admit that I have to keep myself from going a little too far in that direction, because like, and my beta readers had to kind of pull me back a little bit and say, whoa, hold on a second, like what's going on? you know, and like
Oh, they
like one
wanted
of my beta
more.
readers, yeah, he said, well, like he said, like so much is happening. I just felt like I needed to like come up for air, just because the story is moving so fast, right?
Oh,
And so
mm,
I did actually go in, because of
yeah,
that, go
yeah.
in and kind of add a little bit to kind of flesh it out a little bit more,
Slow it
calm
down.
down a little
Slow it
bit,
down.
you know. But for the most part, it's pretty fast paced as fantasy novels go, and that's my style. That's what I like, and I want to try to make,
Hmm.
like instead of telling you, oh, then he thought this and then she thought that. I want to show what people are thinking and feeling through their actions, through their words. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah, it's a
what
different
would
approach.
I think?
I
I
think
think
it.
what would someone do if they were feeling this way, and then I have them do that instead of saying, "Oh, he was nervous." I don't say, "Oh, he was nervous."
Hmm.
I'll say, "Oh, he started fiddling with his belt," or something like that. It's to kind of show
Yeah,
that
yeah.
without explicitly saying it.
Yeah, it's kind of like if I don't know. My example is if you read Dylan lyrics, he he Bob Dylan kind of paints these these worlds and these stories like through the actions of these characters that are usually versions of himself, but a very broad brush and it's kind of vague as to what is going on, and you can kind of feel it through the what they do, like what's going on with these characters, what's the interaction. If you listen to a song like "Idiot Wind" or "Tangled Up in Blue," and he's talking about I'm going to, he's doing this, and he's telling these stories, these very intricate scenes, and you almost can picture him in the woods being a chef, doing those things. And it's a very intricate way of writing. And Springsteen, is similar. He creates these characters that have paint these stories, and they're doing like you almost see a movie. And so, yeah, I've always
Right,
been a
right.
big fan of like of musicians and writers that kind of do what you do as an author. People who paint like a protagonist and create these worlds.
And
But it's a lot,
show what
in
they,
songs you can't go into the great depth that you're talking about.
yeah. Yeah, but an interesting thing about that though is something that I'm going to start doing, like in my uh, in some of my engagement, is like creating very short stories, like where I tell a story in a minute, and that's something that I'm working on, like for TikTok and for
Mm,
YouTube, where I just I write a story. I think
oh,
some of
that's
them are going to
cool.
be
Like a micro
some of them
story.
are going to be fictional, some of them are going to be about true events, but it's just a 60-second story, um, because you can really tell a real compelling story within a very short period. I remember um, the writer Ernest Hemingway. He was talking to some other writers once, and they were talking about the minimum length of a story, and he was saying like, well, there really
Hmm.
isn't a minimum length of a story, and they were incredulous. They're, what do you mean? You have to have some minimum length. And he said, no, I can tell you. He said, no, I can tell you. Uh, I don't remember his exact words, but he said, I can give you a moving story with only 6 words. And and the other
Wow.
writers were like, whatever, okay, let's see that. And so he said, okay. And so he took out pen and paper and he wrote, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. That's it. That was the story.
Oh wow.
Six
That
words.
is a little story. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
that
like
kind of
there's
opens
so
up
much.
a whole lot of things.
Yeah, there's so much there. There's so much there that, and but you hear that, like, just those
Yeah.
6 words like emotionally impact me. Just saying it is like, it makes me go, ooh, ooh. There's so much being told there
Yeah, because I
about
did
this person who has said or written this.
the brev- with the of it, but the way he strung the words together kind of reminds me of one of my favorite Victorian poets is William Blake. And you can go to Victorian era, you can see Wordsworth and Tennyson, Lord Byron, and they go on forever.
Yeah,
But if you go look at Blake and like ones of Innocence and Experience, they're very short, super short
yeah.
compared to the other Victorian poets, are nowhere near the brevity of Blake. But Blake has an impact, kind of like what you talked about with Hemingway. His like you tiger tiger fear through with thy symmetry. These poems are very short in the songs of Innocence and Experience. They don't get paid for them, where the other Victorian poets are going on and on. Um, but he has gotten this impact shorter picture, but they're just as vibrant and say a lot in less words. And I always felt that that's interesting. That's an interesting approach, and a lot of musicians have looked at Blake as an inspiration for like music. When you like Blakean concepts get put into a lot of pop music. A lot of
Yeah,
singer
I'm a big fan of
songwriters
Blake.
take a lot of Blakean ideas.
Yeah, Blake is an interesting guy, kind a little bit crazy, but I think just enough, enough to make him interesting.
Yeah, enough
And
crazy.
yeah, enough crazy. I think there's a lot of creators out there like that, or just a little, they're just a little bit of crazy makes them really interesting, and he's definitely like that. And as far as style, I think I do like Blake a lot. Someone who I kind of associate with Blake is Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins. He wrote the Wind Hover. And he coined he created the concept of sprung rhythm, which is using poetic verse where you only count the stressed syllables, you don't count the unstressed syllables, which is very very interesting way of writing poetry. But I love his language. His language to me feels very modern. It feels like when I read Hopkins, it feels like I could be reading lyrics of something that was written yesterday, from a popular or not so popular from an underground musician. It's
indie. Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, getting inspired by different things, but
But I do also like the other Victorian poets you mentioned. I like Tennyson. Tennyson is he's my homeboy. I like him a lot. Yeah,
I use a lot of his ideas. Well, Lord Byron, I always use Little Death and stuff all the time. And like that's always showing up in a lot of modern music. But yeah, it's just the idea of like, having a base, like the people you're inspired by, and musicians a lot of times we're inspired by like Shakespeare, or we're inspired by it, or Odyssey. We try to take ideas and kind of bring them in to give ourselves like or an inspiration to kind of especially if you're trying to work on like rock operas. Like I try to work on like constructs, then you want to use something that has some kind of theme that you can kind of look toward that to be there, so you can tell the story. And when you're a musician trying to tell the story, like a lot of times we're told, oh, you can only do 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so it's under a shorter frame. And when a lot of us want to go 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes into our our own version of the Bohemian Rhapsody or Hotel California, and the world today doesn't really say that you can do that. If you have a good enough song, you can do it. You serve the song. And like if you have an idea, you can do a short form like you're talking about. You can tell the story in one line. But the short form thing is very, because there's a lot of new podcast forms that are like 5-minute podcasts. Just do 5 minutes and just do what you can do in 5 minutes and see what you can do. And I think that
there's a lot that when you put down limitations, that actually in a way it inspires creativity, because then you force the artist to shape something, to shape it. Like I compare it to like having a small dance, having like a dance floor, as opposed to just like walking around in the world. Walking, you're not just when you go out walking, you're not really limited, but you're not really doing anything all that impressive, but when you put someone on a dance floor with this limited space, or if you put someone on a tightrope, then interesting things start to happen, right? And so that it's the limitations. And actually, this interesting thing about that is that there's actually in the first chapter of my book, I put a quote from one of the characters. Like that, I have epigraphs at the beginning of my chapters that are excerpts from a book that's written by one of the characters in my book, right? Of course, this book doesn't really exist, but in the first one, she talks about how she says discipline is everything, and she says the taut string plays the music, because because the limitation.
I mean, like. Forces innovation. Yeah, it's a common thing, like, in creativity, I believe.
Yeah.
Because I was like, as a musician, like I was using like an analog instrument that had a limitation. It could only do like 8 steps on its sequencer. It doesn't have MIDI. It doesn't have modern stuff, and it had a limitation. But the limitation forced you to to like you can't do everything that the digital stuff can do, right? So if you're forced to only have certain parameters, what can you do within that? You can still be super creative, but they're forced. And I get like if you think about like the 5 minute or the 30 second or 60 seconds parameters, they reduce your options, force you to think out of the box, and then it's like, oh, okay, what could I do? Well, I could kind of try to do something that you wouldn't do. And then it just opens up that it's strange that the limitations can create limitless opportunities.
But yeah, that reminds me, going back to that quote from that character. It's like she says, I have her say, that oh, what's that's people, um, with discipline. When you have discipline, that actually creates freedom, the freedom to do difficult things. Whereas without discipline, then there's no freedom, because then you can't, you turn, when you have no discipline, then you can't do things that are difficult. So that creates a prison out of every circumstance. So in the end, so that lack,
Wow,
so
that's a cool way to say it.
paradoxically, that the lack of limitations limits you, because your experience has no framework, and your creation has no framework, and so it
Hmm.
can't be anything.
If you lose focus, I think you don't have focus, right? Because you're just so wide open that you can't focus. Froze there. I don't know what happened. Somehow your Wi-Fi froze. I don't know what happened
Well,
there. Hopefully,
okay,
yeah,
we're
there you're
back.
back. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back. You're freezing again, but hopefully, I don't know what the Wi-Fi is doing.
Okay. Back again. I don't know what's going on there. Okay. Yeah, like I was saying, just our existence is defined, based on when you have one thing compared against something else, and that implies limitation. And without that limitation, so without that limitation, like creativity doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I totally agree because, like, if you don't have focus, you could just do something for like, as an artist, you could play for like 2 hours and you're just rambling. You're going on and on, and you don't ever get a hook. You don't ever get a melody. You don't have your intro. You don't have your outro. You're just jamming, but it's not a big 2 hour like jam session. Now, how do you take that and focus it down to something that's digestible by the listener? How do you actually turn it into themes and melodies and intros and outros and fills and give it, like in musical theory, the structure of a song
Yeah,
thing, but any kind of definition.
and that's an important part of the creative process. It's an important part of the creative process to be able to just kind of let things out, and like that happens with writers a lot too. Like a lot of time, writers just need to sit down and write, even if it's garbage, just to get all that stuff out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then that helps you to come up with ideas that you can go back and refine and place within a meaningful framework later on, right?
Frame.
So that's a very important part, I think, of the creative process. It's just that it can't be the end product, you know. Remember reading
Yeah, yeah.
from one a literature professor, something written by a literature professor. I forgot his name. He was talking about writing poetry, and he said how, like, every word that you put down creates limitations for what your poem can be. When you have a blank sheet of paper,
Mm,
it can be anything, right? It can be anything. But the more you put down, the narrower the possibilities become. And I think that in order
I
to
see that.
create good, in order for us to create good things, we need to realize that that's what's going on, right? And if we don't have that
Hmm.
that if we're not cognizant of that, then the creative process doesn't go as well. But yeah, like it's the more you have down, the more it is, the fewer possibilities there are of what more it can be, right? Because it's like you're driving toward this final conclusion, and every step you take is you're dedicating yourself to whatever that final destination is going to be, right? As opposed to all the other places you could have gone.
Do you feel like when you start to work on a book or a novella, do you have kind of an outline in your mind, or do you kind of like free form it and then or is it kind of like whatever serves the project? Because sometimes musicians, we idea comes as a dream and it's almost fully fleshed out and we just go with it. And
So like
other
among
times
among
we
writers,
taking here and there and then trying to work them together. So I
um,
mean, creation process is always different for different situations.
among writers, there are these two terms we use: pantsing and plotting. Pantsing, as in like doing things for the seat of your pants. Pantsers are people who just have a very like one little idea, and they sit down, they just start writing, and let's see what happens. And plotters are people who go and they have this idea, then they go and they write an outline, and then they write a more developed outline, and then another outline, and that outline gets bigger and bigger, and then they go and start actually writing the book. And so at the beginning of the book, they know how it's going to end, and they know how they're going
Hmm.
to get there, right? Pantsers don't do that, and these are two valid processes. And of course, pantsers, by the end, they
Yeah.
do end up having to go through and do revisions and fix things because of their intrinsically chaotic process, right? I think I'm more of a plotter. When I wrote
Yeah, it
Wild
doesn't.
River,
The timeline might not work.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
like yeah,
that's
like
how you
when
are.
I actually, yeah, when I went and wrote Wild River, I had it all plotted out chapter by chapter what I was going to do, and of course that ended up changing. Like I didn't stick to that completely because I came up with new ideas as I went along, but I
Hmm.
mostly stuck to that, and that gave me a very solid framework for me to work within. But not only that, like I came up with the concept of this fantasy world, and I had, before I wrote a single word of any story, I had come up with thousands of years of of history
Like
that
timeline.
I that I
Oh, you
yeah
create
that I
like a
plotted out the
timeline.
timeline. Yeah, a timeline throughout this world, to create a setting, right? And once I had that, then I started moving on and actually writing stories. So yeah, and the
Do
funny thing
you do
about that
like
is actually
profiles,
profiles.
like character profiles? Like if you create your project, yeah, like a lot of my daughter's a comic
Character
book
profiles?
artist. Like so when she goes to create her characters, she'll actually
Oh yeah, absolutely.
she's a graphic artist, and
Yeah,
she before she even starts she creates the characters and makes all their variations of what the character is going to look like, and kind of gives their backstory to kind of build them out. So like you have your timeline, build the personality, and create the traits or say how that person is going to be.
yeah, I go and like for all my main characters, I go and I write what they look like, the basics of their character, their age, and like their family background, and nationality, things like that, and I talk and I write about their personality traits. What kind of personality do they have? And I start from that. If you don't have a
Mhm.
good sense of that, then your story is gonna kind of go all over the place because you're not gonna have a clear sense of what this person is going to do in various situations. I think when when readers get angry at novelists, um, Like there's a difference. There's a difference between getting angry at a character and getting angry at the novelist. If you like, sometimes characters will do terrible or stupid things, but the reader knows that that is what that character would do, right? And so they'll get really mad at the character, but they won't get mad at the novelist because they realize that what was written is true to what that character has always been, or what that character has been building toward. But sometimes novelists mess up and they'll have a character do something that's not characteristic to them, and then readers will get angry at the novelist, right? Because it doesn't make it like you weren't true to this character. You changed this character without giving us like any believable process that would have changed this character. All of a sudden he was a different person who makes different kinds of decisions, and that's
somebody goes like 180 degree. They do 100. They fit story. Like maybe it's like the shortcut. Is it a situation where they kind of want to shortcut like the plot and make somebody do something, and it's really not that error. They just do it to solve an issue with the story or something. I don't know.
They want to create drama. Like when a big example of that in pop culture for me that my wife and I talked about was in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Civil War, Marvel Civil War, with all the heroes fighting against each other. They just all of a sudden they just all seem so temperamental and childlike. All of a sudden these are not mature adults. They just resort to violence to deal with each other, and these are all supposed to be good guys, and they're all supposed to be smart, but they all of a sudden start doing all these dumb things. Like the core conflict makes sense, but the way they had that play out just seemed kind of ridiculous, because you just don't see those characters doing those things, and I hope that never happens in my writing. I hope that people will never see my characters do something and be like, oh, he never would have done that. He's just trying to create drama.
But sometimes they short
story.
Well, the interesting thing is, like, there was a bigger arc in the Marvel comic book universe that was they tried to do a big arc that went on for like 40, 50 issues in 2 hours. I think that's the problem when you take something that's a longer story that had a lot of nuance and took a longer time. It took like a year. Like some of these big plot lines in these comic book universes, things that go through multiple books for like a year. And then if you do it in 2 hours or 3 hours, you make cut corners to get to where you want to be as a director, I guess.
and I understand, that's an inherent limitation of, working in film. That's because there's so much from the source material in the comics. They have so much to work with, and they want to be true to that. But at the same time, there's just no way they're going to make a movie for all of that, So
you can't.
It's a challenge.
You can't do it. So you try to shortcut it. Yeah,
and I think for the most part,
like if you're a novelist and you shortcut.
Yeah, I don't want to shortcut my.
I guess I was saying it here.
Story, That's and that's what happens.
Yeah, because if you got the time.
When readers get mad at writers, they're doing that. They're taking shortcuts and not being true to the character just because they want something to happen.
Is it because of like the reader's attention span? Because I've heard like people say, well, a novel could be like, if you go like 120,000 words, that's too long. Like the people will be 60, 70,000. So if that's the case, maybe you shortcut something because you're trying to fit it into 70,000 instead of 120,000.
I can certainly see writers doing that. Yeah, to cut down, and that's a big issue for fantasy writers because we have all the world building in there. Fantasy writers tend to go a little longer because we have to put more exposition in there to tell the same story, the same type of story, But like my and so and just in general, our books tend to run longer. I can tell you, Wheel of Time, any book from the Wheel of Time series, is a lot more than 120,000 words, a lot more. I don't even know what his word count is, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Mine, like my Wild River is about 170,000, and like that's long compared to
Yeah. When you go into
to
fantasy, I think
realistic
you go
fiction,
way yeah,
but
average.
in the fantasy world, that's actually not very long. That's pretty actually kind of standard.
Well,
But
your
yeah,
readers are more
realistic fiction
likely to
can be
want
shorter.
that, right? Your
Yeah,
your readers are willing to deal with like 200,000 words, where like maybe somebody who's writing the other type of fiction is more restricted, or the people in the A&R people are saying, well, you got to get it done in fewer words because what they're saying the market bears. But the way I always look at it is, you never, well, like I guess in the world of fantasy, it seems like people want the bigger picture. And you were already saying that you didn't want to build a world as detailed, but I guess like in terms of telling the story, like it takes what it takes. Like people say
yeah.
in
Well,
music, like if it serves the song to have a 7-minute song, you write the 7-minute song instead of a 2-minute song.
yeah, and I think it's important. Like world building is important. I don't want to act like I don't do world building or I don't like it. I do it and I like it. It's just that I want a lot of it to be implied instead of
Hmm.
going into details that aren't important to the story, right? And I do kind of cheat a little bit because my world is actually very similar to our world in many ways. Um,
Hmm.
I it's basically like, well, like when you read Wild River, you see like, okay, this is a scenario very similar to America in the 1860s, except there's magic, and of course the political situation is different because it's a different world. Um, but there's some magic element there, and that makes things a little different. But in most other ways, it's not too different from our world because people are still people. People still act the way people act, and even insofar as there is magic, it's not like it's very limited magic. It's for the most part. There are some
Hmm.
exceptions there, but you have to read the story to see this. But for the most part, it's very limited. So it doesn't change human society all that much. And so that's why I don't have to get as much into the nitty gritty world building as some other authors do, because my world isn't that different from our world. Because I decided I wanted a story that's a
Yeah,
little
because
more
if you
character
create this
driven.
whole fantasy,
But I do like
I guess
the
yeah,
I do like having the magic element, having the fantastic element in there. I definitely like it. It's just not as much a focus of the story, I think, as it might be, for some other fantasy
well,
writers.
so you're maybe your focus is the human, even don't have
Yeah,
to depend on the fantasy magical powers as much as the drama of actual human like the drama of human interaction is enough to keep you engaged if you're good at of talking that through, or painting the picture of like how why people get pulled into romance novels, why people get pulled. So if you make it very interesting, the interactions between your characters itself, to have the magic powers be the primary mover, if
right,
it's the
right,
actual conversation and dialogue and interactions between your characters that are the prime movers.
right. Yeah. And like and you can
So
kind of
that's
see that in just like when I talk about just like the basics of who the characters are. Like the main character is his name is Bondus Riverman, and he's kind of a cross between Frederick Douglass and Sherlock Holmes and me. that's that's what he is, and he's
a hybrid.
he, but he's just like he's I think he's a very he's how do I express what he is? He in some ways he lacks people skills. He he he's an imperfect but very um, sympathetic person. Like you care about him, you like him, you see that he does some kind of illogical things sometimes, but within a very believable character framework. He's his social skills aren't always the best, but you like him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see the things that he cares about, and you care about the things that he cares about. And I think that's a very important aspect of writing fiction is drawing people into the character and making them care about the character and care about what the character cares about. In Wild River, what he cares about, one of the things, there are two main things that he cares about. One is that he wants to find this young woman who's gone missing. He's been hired to find this young woman who's gone missing, who's seemingly a no one, but for some reason, powerful people are interested in her. And he also, in a broader sense, he's seeking redemption for things that he has done in the past that he regrets. And he wants to make the world a better place, but he doesn't know exactly how. And he's kind of haunted by that. And that really drives the narrative. And with all these things going on, there's plenty of action, there's plenty of violence, there's plenty of fighting, but beneath all of that, the thing that's really going on with his character that's so important is that he begins the story liking people in general, but feeling distant from them and not feeling that he is able to be loved or to love. And even though this is not a romance novel, one of the important things that happens in the story is that wall starts to break down, and he starts to have that connection, and that's one of the
So he's
important
like,
developments of the story.
so it's had like enemy, and then they get more connected. The enemy is like this sociality idea of like being not part of society, you're kind of being disconnected, but
Yeah,
people kind of long to be part of the group. They long, but then they might be an outsider. So like you create a character that's kind of like an anti-hero outsider, and they got problems, but they want to be loved, they want to be connected. Is that
right.
kind of like the feel?
Yeah, and like he likes people,
Yeah.
but he just doesn't feel that he connects with people very well, you know. And he doesn't feel that he deserves love because of things that he's done in the past.
Mm.
But there's a bit of a redemption arc in there, and part of it is
Yeah,
doing
that
this case and
makes it
trying
interesting.
to find the girl who's gone missing. Yeah.
Well, I think if you create a character that's too perfect, then it's kind of boring. Like I love characters that are flawed.
Yeah.
Because if they have flaws, then they're kind of like, it's a lot more interesting to see somebody. It's like if they're like a Superman, where they're perfect, right? It's like, well, what's
But,
the point?
and,
They got to try to find a way to
and
take
I
down
think that some
Superman.
writers
But
go
it's like
too
the idea that
some writers go too far with that too, and they make characters that are so imperfect that you just don't like them, And I don't want to do that for the most
yeah, I
part.
guess you gotta like them. You gotta like them.
I yeah, I still want people to like my protagonists, and I feel that they do and they will. People who have read it have told me that they do, that they like him, and that's good. I'm glad of that. And like, yeah, I don't want people to suddenly start hating my main characters, when I didn't intend them to. It's just because I wanted to make them supposedly
Yeah,
interesting to the point where
edgy.
they're
Yeah,
not even,
so you get
they're edgy
the
to the point of not
anti-hero.
being likable. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say I have a couple
Yeah,
characters who could count as anti-heroes, but not the main protagonists.
main character.
They're
So
not.
he's not
I
so
try to make
much that
them
he's like
likable.
kind of like like I don't know. I always liked Clint Eastwood in The Man with No Name, and he was always kind of like he's not a perfect person. He's kind of like the bad guy, but he's like, but you feel for him because he's like, okay, well, he has some kind of morality, but it's kind of like, okay, which way is he going? Just enough. They're like, well, okay, he's kind of a bad guy, but he's kind of like we still care about him, but he's like he's not perfect. He's got issues, but it draws you in because
Mhm.
he's not the perfect guy coming to like save the day. He's kind of like, oh, he's not really caring about saving the day.
Yeah, I think my protagonists are not quite that edgy for the most part. Like, um, but uh, but but I do want them to be interesting. I definitely don't go Mary Sue. Um, and and in fact, there are two elements of that. First, like I want them to have real moral dilemmas and weaknesses character that they have to address. But also,
Hmm.
I don't want them to be like I want the reader to feel that there are real risks that they face. And like Bondas, for example, he goes into these very dangerous situations, and the honest truth is he can fight, but he's not the best fighter around. He's not the most dangerous man around. There are a lot of people around who are much more powerful than he is, and he just has to deal with that. And I think that's an important part of the story, to not feel like that, like, oh, he's just going to go into every situation and kill everyone who opposes him, and that's it.
Yeah,
It's
this
not
kind
an
of
interesting story when you do that.
yeah, this becomes too kind of formula. It's always gonna win. It's like if every episode like Perry Mason always wins the case. Like if you're always gonna win, what's the point?
Mhm.
Like you never lose. Like how is that? Like every single case you win. It's like, well, how I never seen a lawyer win every case. So I mean, the idea is like you overdo it, and it's a balance to try to create a character that is not perfect, that's likable, but somehow not that kind of always going to win. The fact that you could lose,
Right.
that you could be outgunned, that maybe you have to come back the next day. That you're not going to
Yeah, and I don't
always
want to give away
have
too much, but yeah,
a predictable
Bondas
outcome.
Bondas does not always win. I'm gonna say that. I'm not gonna say more than that, but yeah, Bondas does not always win. He's
Yeah, yeah, that's
he has
always
weaknesses,
interesting.
and because of that he doesn't always win.
Well, we actually have like fun where we don't realize how long we've been talking, but I think people should check out the website again. It's www.kimmons.com and /free dash novella, and you can get into the story. Both of them are available, and from your website you can get to both of your pieces of work. Right, you can get to the free novella and
That's right.
the full Wild River novel.
That's right.
Well, thank you for being with us tonight. I think it's always great for people to be introduced to new creators, and I hope people click on the link and check it out. And yeah, that's just something that's I did, and I'm actually in the middle of it, and I'm going to go and continue it. And I think it's always cool to find new work out there, and I encourage people to click when we publish. That will be clickable, and do download the free novel. So it will support the people we talk to. And so if you have a free item, you should take advantage of that. So I do
Yeah, go
suggest
get
that
the
people
novella.
check that out
It's
and
free.
get into what we've been talking about. Yeah, it's free. It's like what can you lose?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much for being on the show. We appreciate it, and I hope they have a good night. And again, this will be in a wider publication on any kind of platform that you check out a podcast on. We'll give you a landing page for your fans so they can listen and watch it on any place they want to. That'll be available by tomorrow. So thank you again for being on the Phantom Electric Ghost Show.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Have a good night.